10 young women sit outside a house on a hillside west of Jerusalem, and the sun has just gone down. Each of them holds a small clay lamp. Each lamp is lit. The air smells faintly of olive oil and wood smoke, and somewhere down the road a dog is barking at nothing. Nobody in this village knows exactly what hour the groom will come. That is not an accident. That is the custom. You have to understand something about weddings in this world before you can understand what happens next. A man does not simply marry a woman and walk her home the same day. He pays the bride price. He signs the contract. And then he leaves, sometimes for months, to build an addition onto his father's house, a room where he will bring his bride to live. Nobody, not even the groom himself, always knows exactly when that room will be finished, so the bride waits. And on the night he finally comes, he comes without warning. A shout in the street, a torch in the dark, and every young woman standing outside that house had better already have her lamp burning, because there will be no time to run home and get oil once that shout goes up. This is not a story about 10 lamps. This is not a story about who remembered to pack extra oil. This is not a story about being punctual. This is a story about a door, one specific door, in one specific house, on one specific night, and about which side of it you are standing on when it closes. Jesus told this story just days before he died. He was sitting with his closest friends on the Mount of Olives, looking down at the temple. And he had just told them that not even he knew the day or the hour of what was coming. And then, instead of giving them a date, he gave them a wedding. 5 of the young women in his story are called wise. 5 are called foolish. All 10 have lamps. All 10 are invited. All 10 fall asleep waiting, because the groom takes far longer than anyone expected. On paper, there is almost nothing separating them until the shout finally comes at midnight, and one small difference decides everything. We are going to come back to that door. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you will understand exactly why it closes, and exactly what was inside that lamp that could never, not for any price, be borrowed from someone else. To understand the oil, you first have to understand a man named Boaz. Centuries before this parable, a wealthy landowner in Bethlehem saw a foreign widow gleaning grain in his fields. Her name was Ruth. She was a Moabite woman who had left her own country and her own gods to follow her mother-in-law into a land that owed her nothing. Boaz did not marry her that week. There was a process. A kinsman with a prior claim had to release his right first, in public, at the city gate, in front of 10 elders sitting as witnesses. You can almost see it. Sandals removed, hands raised, a whole town watching a legal formality that would decide the rest of a young widow's life. Only after all of that could Boaz say the words that made her his. Marriage in this world was never a single moment. It was a long, careful unfolding, betrothal first, and full union later, sometimes a year or more apart. Here's what most people miss about that gap between betrothal and wedding day. The bride was already legally bound to her groom during that entire waiting period, even though she wasn't yet living under his roof. She belonged to him, and she had one job during the wait: stay ready. Now carry that idea forward 1,000 years to a riverbank outside Jerusalem, where a wild-haired preacher named John was baptizing crowds in the Jordan. When people asked John if he was the promised one, he told them plainly that he was not. He said someone was coming after him, whose sandals he wasn't worthy to untie. And when Jesus of Nazareth finally appeared, John used a specific word for him: not king, not prophet, bridegroom. The Hebrew word behind that whole picture is chitan, and it carries the full weight of everything you just heard about Boaz. He who has the bride is the bridegroom, John said. John called himself the friend standing outside the wedding chamber, listening for the groom's voice, rejoicing simply because he got to hear it. Then he said something almost unbearably humble. He must increase. I must decrease. The forerunner stepped back so the bridegroom could step forward. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing decades after these events, described the customs of his own people in careful detail. The betrothal contracts, the year of preparation, the sudden and often unannounced return of the groom to collect his bride. He wasn't writing about a parable. He was writing about ordinary life, which means when Jesus told this story to his disciples, nobody needed it explained to them. They had all been to weddings like this. They had all stood outside houses at dusk, waiting for a shout in the dark. And here's the part that should stop you cold. Jesus told this story to men who, within days, would scatter in fear, deny they ever knew him, and hide behind locked doors. He was not lecturing strangers about readiness. He was warning the people closest to him, the ones who thought they understood him best. That closeness is not the same thing as readiness. You can walk with him for 3 years. You can eat at his table. And you can still fall asleep holding an empty lamp. So here is where we are. 10 women. 10 lamps. 1 bridegroom somewhere out there in the dark, on his way. 5 of them are called wise. 5 are called foolish. And so far, every single one of them looks exactly the same to anyone watching from the outside. If this video is helping you see this parable differently than you've heard it explained before, do me a favor and hit subscribe, because we're about to get to the part almost nobody explains correctly, what that oil actually is. And it is not what you think. Most sermons will tell you the oil represents good deeds. Do enough good things, store up enough spiritual fuel, and you'll be ready when the moment comes. It's a tidy explanation. It preaches well, and it misses almost everything the original listeners would have understood instantly. Look at what actually happens in the story. The wise women don't earn their oil in front of us. They don't work for it while we watch. They simply already have it, in small flasks, carried alongside their lamps, before the story even begins. Nobody is shown filling those flasks through labor. The oil isn't a reward you accumulate as the story unfolds. It's something you already possess when the story starts, or you don't. Pay attention to this. In the ancient world, oil for a lamp wasn't a symbol of effort. It was simply what made the light possible at all. Without oil, a lamp is just a piece of clay. It can hold a flame for a moment, on the wick alone, just long enough to look lit from a distance. But it will not last through a long night. It will not survive an unexpected delay. The rabbis of that era, reflecting on the same wedding customs Josephus described, connected the picture of oil less to labor and more to something quieter, to mercy carried within a person, a reserve of relationship that cannot be seen from the outside until the moment it's tested by darkness and by time. Now, watch what happens at midnight. The cry goes up in the street. Every one of the 10 women wakes up. Every one of them trims her wick with tired fingers, half asleep, half dreaming. And that's when 5 of them discover their lamps are sputtering, going dark. Not because they were lazy, not because they slept longer than the others. Everyone slept. But because what was inside their flasks was never enough to survive the wait. So they turned to the 5 wise women and asked to borrow oil. And here is the line that makes people uncomfortable every time they actually sit with it. The wise women say no. "Give us some of your oil," they beg. And the answer comes back. "Not enough for us and for you. Go instead to those who sell it. Read 100 sermons on this parable, and most of them will call that response harsh, selfish even. But sit with what the oil actually represents here, and the refusal stops looking like cruelty and starts looking like plain impossibility. You cannot borrow someone else's relationship with God. You cannot hand your spouse your marriage the way you'd hand a neighbor a cup of sugar over a fence. A parent cannot transfer their own walk with God into their child's chest through sheer wanting it to be so. The wise women aren't being stingy. They're telling the truth about something that was never transferable in the first place, and no amount of love between them could change that fact. Hold that thought for a moment, because the wise women don't stop the others from going to buy oil. They don't say it's too late. They send them out into the dark, toward the cellars, still hoping there's time. There wasn't. While the 5 foolish women are out in the dark, hunting for oil that money can buy at midnight, the bridegroom arrives. Those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. Listen to that sentence again, slowly. Not locked from outside by an angry guard. Shut simply because the wedding had begun, and everyone who belonged inside was already inside. This is the same hillside village we started with, the same house, the same kind of clay lamps burning in the dark. But now you can finally see which door we've been circling this whole time. A door that closes not out of spite, but because a wedding, by its very nature, cannot wait forever for guests who are somewhere else when the groom arrives. Later, the 5 foolish women come back. "Lord, Lord," they say, "open to us." And the answer they receive is the coldest 6 words in this entire story. "I do not know you." The Greek word there is nosko, and it is worth slowing down for. It doesn't simply mean I am unaware you exist. It's the same word used elsewhere in Scripture for the intimacy between a husband and a wife, a knowing that goes far deeper than recognizing a face in a crowd. The bridegroom isn't saying he's never seen these women before. He's saying there was never a relationship there to begin with. Lamps, invitations, proximity to the wedding. None of that was ever the same thing as being known. But it gets stranger. That same night, hours later, in a courtyard near a different kind of fire, a disciple named Peter would be asked 3 times if he knew a certain man from Galilee. Peter, who had walked beside Jesus for years. Peter, who had watched him heal the sick with his own 2 eyes. 3 times, out of fear, Peter would say no. "I do not know him." The very words the bridegroom speaks to the foolish women in this parable, Peter would speak about Jesus himself before the sun came up. Jesus told this story to the one man in the room who would, within hours, stand outside a different door and deny the exact kind of knowing this whole parable is about. Keep that in mind, because it changes how you hear the ending. This is not a story about 10 lamps. This is not a story about who ran out of oil. This is not a story about being a few minutes late. This is a story about whether the door that closes tonight was ever going to open for you at all, because of a relationship built long before midnight, not because of a scramble in the dark once the shout goes up. Think about what it's like to wait up for someone you love, not knowing which night they'll finally come home. You don't know the hour. You can't predict the moment. All you can do is stay ready, long before the headlights ever show up in the driveway, because by the time you hear the car, it's too late to go looking for what you should have already had. That waiting, that quiet readiness nobody sees until it's tested, is the whole heart of this parable. Not a checklist, not a countdown, a relationship kept warm long before anyone ever hears the cry at midnight. So here's what this parable is actually asking you. Takeaway 1. The oil was never good deeds you could stockpile at the last minute. It was a relationship carried quietly, long before anyone heard a cry in the night. Takeaway 2. Closeness to Jesus and knowing Him are not automatically the same thing. You can sit in the room, you can carry the lamp, and you can still hear the words no one wants to hear. Takeaway 3, and this is the one that should actually keep you up tonight. The door in this story doesn't close because God is cruel. It closes because a wedding cannot wait forever for guests who are somewhere else when the groom finally comes. And once it closes, no amount of knocking, no amount of "Lord, Lord" changes what was already true the whole time you were asleep. Which of those 3 takeaways hit you the hardest tonight? The oil, the knowing, or the door? Tell me in the comments below, because somewhere, on some night nobody can predict, a cry is going to go up in the dark. And the only question this parable ever really asked is the same one it's asking you right now. Will your lamp still be burning?